Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session, this first session on integrated fire management. Thank you for your presence and for your interest. I'm just briefly going to name, I'll not introduce the members of this session because you have all the information on the app. But on my left, I have Gary Morgan from Australia, Mr. José Luís Carneiro, the Minister of Internal Affairs of Portugal, Marc Castelnau from, shall I say Spain or Catalonia?
Both.
Judy Beck from Canada and Lara Steele from Brazil. Our session will start with an address by the Minister. Sir, if you wish.
Senhor Presidente da GIF, quero saudá-lo, Tiago Oliveira, e em si cumprimentar toda a equipa que teve a responsabilidade de organizar e de preparar esta iniciativa que reputo da maior importância para a nossa vida coletiva, não apenas para a vida naturalmente evidente do nosso país, mas também para a vida internacional e o contributo que a partir desta sessão, deste diálogo, entre diferentes perspectivas, diferentes óticas de conhecer e de saber o contributo que este diálogo pode dar para o conhecimento global e como ele pode ajudar-nos a encontrar respostas para as diferentes dificuldades. Permita-me que saúde também o Sr. Presidente da Autoridade Nacional de Proteção Civil e o Sr. Presidente do ICNF e que saúde os demais responsáveis institucionais que aqui se encontram de Portugal e que saúde o nosso painel, o nosso responsável pela condução deste painel, todas e todos convidados, bem-vindos a Portugal. As alterações sociais, económicas e ambientais dos últimos 50 anos trouxeram mutações muito profundas no ordenamento do território, na estrutura e na composição da paisagem e na destruição de muita da nossa biodiversidade. Somente o ordenamento do território, a organização da propriedade, o uso económico, social e ambiental da floresta, a par com a alteração da estrutura da paisagem e o uso sustentável da biodiversidade, permitirá dar perspectivas de futuro sustentável. O que impõe, do meu ponto de vista e do nosso ponto de vista, um amplo consenso político e um amplo consenso social. Implica um amplo consenso político e social porque, no nosso entender, esta matéria tem muito que ver com a cultura e com as mentalidades. Bem sabemos que a cultura e as mentalidades é mesmo o que há de mais essencial nas nossas atitudes e nos nossos comportamentos e é por isso que essa é mesmo a grande transformação que precisamos de fazer. O homem sedentarizou-se com o fogo e com a agricultura, mas o homem atual globalizou-se e desterritorializou-se. Deixou de olhar para a terra, para o território e para aquilo que o território, a agricultura e a floresta têm para nos dizer e para nos ensinar. Deixou de ter tempo para contemplar a natureza. E é importante voltarmos a ganhar esse tempo e perceber como a natureza nos pode dar tanto e de forma tão sustentável. As alterações demográficas, a pressão sobre os recursos e os efeitos do aquecimento global fazem-se sentir no nosso cotidiano, no cotidiano de todos nós. Em 2022, todos bem sabem, a União Europeia teve mais de 60% dos incêndios e mais de 69% da área ardida. Portugal teve mesmo temperaturas acima dos 47 graus, umidades abaixo de 10% e teve ventos em muitos momentos acima dos 60 km. É por isso que, em matéria de proteção civil, os incêndios rurais não são, naturalmente, o único risco que nos preocupa. No entanto, devido aos efeitos das alterações climáticas que temos vindo a sentir, este problema tem uma dimensão incontornável e é aquele que mais tem afetado as comunidades locais, particularmente em momentos de especial receio, de angústia e até de confiança nas suas instituições. Daí que tenhamos em curso esforços coletivos, nacionais, esforços coletivos com as comunidades locais, para podermos restabelecer essa confiança. Mas é um esforço que compete a todos. É um esforço da sociedade civil, é um esforço dos poderes públicos e é um esforço dos poderes privados. Se quisermos, é um esforço de coesão nacional e, naturalmente, de coesão global. Com isto em mente, a AGIF, na pessoa do Tiago Oliveira e da sua equipa, tem vindo a realizar um trabalho estruturado para o médio e para o longo prazo. Esta conferência, para nós, é um momento muito relevante para todo o nosso país, para o Governo de Portugal, para o nosso Primeiro-Ministro, mas é um momento muito relevante para todos aqueles e para todas aquelas que procuram olhar para estas transformações sistémicas que estamos a viver, tendo em vista encontrar também soluções que sejam holísticas, soluções que sejam sistémicas, porque elas têm que ser holísticas e sistémicas e têm que contar com toda a nossa vontade, com a vontade de todos nós. Estou convicto de que o manancial de conhecimento que aqui se vai produzir será importante para incorporar nas respostas de políticas públicas, na política e nas opções de política de todos nós. Sabemos todos que o combate aos incêndios é o fim da linha, mas é uma das linhas, nomeadamente em períodos determinados do ano. Essa é a razão porque temos de aprender com a experiência feita. Temos de saber ouvir. E permitam-me que o diga nesta sessão. Temos de nos saber ouvir uns aos outros. Saber ouvir e incorporar esse conhecimento nas respostas que temos vindo a dar e que seremos capazes de dar no futuro. Portugal teve, infelizmente, uma circunstância muito difícil em 2017. Foram muitas vidas que se perderam. E procuramos aprender com o que se fez em 2017. A AGIF é mesmo o resultado desse percurso que foi feito. Fizemos-lo também em 2022. E entre as medidas que procuramos incorporar, quer no quadro da metodologia das lições aprendidas, quer da auscultação com os peritos diversos dos nossos centros de conhecimento nacionais, mas também dos peritos que têm vindo a dar os seus contributos, procuramos também nesta resposta para 2023 incorporar várias das recomendações para o combate. Primeiro, a adoção de um plano integrado para a Serra da Estrela de proteção da floresta contra incêndios, como já tínhamos também para uma outra dimensão do nosso país, para o Gerês. São dois espaços especialmente importantes do ponto de vista da biodiversidade e até da reserva da biosfera. Depois, a adoção de 5 equipas de comando especializado para ocorrências mais complexas, para capacitar a capacidade do sistema com 5 equipas em cada uma dos territórios e dos comandos regionais. A adoção de ações prévias para a verificação das faixas que integram a rede primária para efeitos de validação da sua utilização em casos de incêndio rural. Por outro lado, ainda o esforço orçamental para reforçar os meios terrestres, os meios humanos, os meios aéreos, no diálogo com a própria União Europeia, que quis e decidiu, e bem no nosso entender, reforçar os meios, antecipar os meios e pré-posicionar esses meios. Investindo, que é aquilo que é mais importante fazer, na capacitação de todo o sistema, desde o topo até à base, naquilo que são as dimensões públicas, as dimensões sociais e a dimensão privada. Por outro lado, o recurso ao uso de fogo controlado em circunstâncias devidamente estabelecidas e devidamente observadas. Verifiquei que a questão do uso de fogo tem sido uma das questões que aqui tem sido colocada nesta conferência. O uso de fogo adequado, nos momentos oportunos, no outono e no inverno. Saber lidar com o fogo foi das mensagens que ontem consegui ouvir, que passou bem para o conjunto da sociedade. Sabermos usar o fogo e fazer do fogo uma força de organização, de controlo e mitigação de dados e de riscos e de ameaças é naturalmente uma dimensão instrumental. Mas usá-lo em períodos críticos tem que ser mesmo com uma observação muito rigorosa no cumprimento das regras estabelecidas. Mas sabemos bem, como aqui tem sido dito, que o uso do fogo em tempo adequado, em tempo oportuno, será sempre um recurso que, devidamente acompanhado, pode e deve ser utilizado com inteligência, com proporcionalidade, com parcimónia. Em 2003, em 2005 e em 2017 foram anos de grande consternação. Perdemos mais de 150 vidas entre operacionais e civis e foram destruídos mais de 2.700.000 hectares de floresta. É uma realidade que podemos, infelizmente, ainda há pouco tempo, ver também noutras regiões do mundo, para onde, aliás, colocamos também meios humanos e materiais portugueses. É bem verdade que o fogo, enquanto prática ancestral, é uma parte integrante da floresta, mas as mudanças operadas nos territórios transformaram esta prática num risco nem sempre bem gerido. O abandono dos espaços rurais, o envelhecimento da população ou das populações aí remanescentes, a desvalorização da floresta enquanto ativo económico, social e ambiental foram fatores decisivos para que o fogo nestas áreas se tenha transformado num perigo real, ameaçando populações, o território e o ambiente. É este ciclo que é preciso quebrar. Os dias de calor não podem ser permanentemente momentos de risco, de receio e de medo dos nossos cidadãos. Tenho a profunda convicção de que Portugal dispõe de um sistema de proteção civil onde se integram os bombeiros, que no caso português tem uma matriz voluntária e que é uma das expressões de solidariedade automática, mecânica, que deve ser valorizada, mas que não dispensa o esforço de profissionalização e de capacitação do sistema no que tem vindo a ser feito por intermédio da criação das equipas de intervenção permanente, que devem ter e manter níveis permanentes, esforços permanentes de capacitação, de formação física, técnica, psicológica, para ser capaz de enfrentar cenários cada vez mais complexos e exigentes, não apenas no âmbito dos incêndios, mas também de outros riscos naturais. Queria também lembrar que implementamos em conjunto com o poder local e com o contributo da Academia. Temos aqui professores da Academia que contribuíram muito para este sistema. Avançamos com o programa Aldeias Seguras, Pessoas Seguras, o qual conta hoje com 2.300 aldeias envolvidas e cerca de 3.000 locais de abrigo e de refúgio identificados, num trabalho permanente da Autoridade Nacional de Emergência e de Proteção Civil, em diálogo com os municípios, em diálogo com as freguesias em todo o país. Mas também recordo o projeto Condomínios da Aldeia do Ministério do Ambiente, que tem vindo a ser desenvolvido em todo o país, com mais de 200 projetos neste momento, onde tem estado o Ministério do Ambiente e o Instituto para a Conservação da Natureza e das Florestas, e ainda o próprio Ministério da Agricultura. A mudança que se exige e que tem vindo a ser prosseguida através, nomeadamente, da materialização, entre outros instrumentos, do Sistema de Gestão Integrada de Fogos Rurais, é uma mudança sistémica, que assume um compromisso de longo prazo de toda a comunidade nacional, com novas abordagens, com a adequação de comportamentos e de atitudes e com melhor gestão do risco. Mas, como disse e repito, sublinho, exige um amplo pacto político entre as forças políticas e sociais e que não dispensa um compromisso da comunicação social para um uso da informação e da comunicação que seja também indutor de atitudes e de comportamentos. E por isso o apelo que aqui deixo também à comunicação social. Sabem bem que o nosso Sistema de Gestão Integrada dos Fogos Rurais, a administração interna, neste sistema, não tem responsabilidades diretas no trabalho de prevenção estrutural, na criação de valor económico da floresta, ou mesmo na própria contratação e operação até dos meios aéreos. Ao Ministério da Administração Interna cabe a linha do combate e da prevenção imediata, para proteger vidas, para proteger os bens das pessoas, para proteger o património ambiental. Daí que temos vindo a concentrar os nossos esforços no fortalecimento das nossas capacidades em matéria de preparação, vigilância, fiscalização, sensibilização, resposta operacional e recuperação. Procurando, contudo, manter e aprofundar uma relação de cooperação com as áreas do ambiente, da agricultura, da defesa, com os autarcas e com a coesão. Porque entendemos que é assim que deve ser. Porque entendemos que essa é a melhor maneira de servir Portugal e de servir todo o conjunto dos atores que se envolvem com estas preocupações de preservação da floresta e da sua valorização. Daí que tenhamos cooperado no esforço de prevenção do Ministério do Ambiente, no diálogo com os autarcas, reunindo e interagindo com eles. Porque nas autarquias, é nos poderes locais que estão 90% das ocorrências e que está também 90% da solução para essas ocorrências. Daí a defesa que temos vindo a fazer para a criação de valor também económico da floresta nos territórios rurais. E daí o esforço que procuramos introduzir em outubro e novembro de 2022 para a necessidade de prepararmos a primavera e o verão no outono e no inverno. Mas bem sabemos que o combate é o momento de especial vivência intensa das paixões das comunidades pela aflição que se constitui sobre a proteção das suas vidas e a proteção do seu património. Por isso, temos também vindo a reforçar os meios humanos, materiais, financeiros. Mas, como foi dito ontem por várias intervenções, por mais meios que o país venha a ter, eles serão sempre limitados para o conjunto das necessidades, sobretudo em dias, em semanas de muitas ocorrências ao mesmo tempo. É por isso que é necessário evitar as ignições. É preciso evitar os incêndios nos períodos críticos e mais graves das temperaturas, da seca e dos ventos. Temos que deixar muito claro que neste domínio e neste âmbito as atitudes e os comportamentos individuais são absolutamente decisivos, porque está nas atitudes e nos comportamentos a capacidade do próprio sistema ter capacidade de resposta com eficácia. E o sistema tem vindo a responder com eficácia. Em 2022, 90% das ocorrências tiveram uma resolução até aos 90 minutos. Mas houve 10% que ultrapassaram esses 90 minutos. E o conhecimento que se tem vindo a produzir em relação a estes 10% é muito relevante para protegermos as pessoas, para protegermos os seus bens. Profissionalização, resiliência comunitária, capacitação, sensibilização, cooperação nacional e internacional, são alguns dos pilares do caminho que tem vindo a ser desenvolvido. E sublinho que em 2022 tivemos cerca de 20 mil formandos na Escola Nacional de Bombeiros em 1.720 ações de formação para capacitar todo o sistema. Mas é preciso continuarmos. Aliás, alinhados com os objetivos do quadro Sendai, que está neste momento na Organização das Nações Unidas a ser objeto de avaliação, onde está, aliás, a Secretária de Estado da Proteção Civil portuguesa a participar nesse trabalho conjunto e para o qual Portugal tem dado contributos importantes. Importa relembrar que aquele que era um fenómeno de grande complexidade, dos denominados incêndios extremos, que afetava sobretudo a região do Mediterrâneo, chegou em 2022 também aos países do Norte, como a Suécia, a República Checa, a Alemanha, a Eslovénia. É por isso que a cooperação é cada vez mais importante e os esforços da União Europeia para reforçar o mecanismo europeu de proteção civil são esforços que devem ser sinalizados e que implicam este ano cerca de 250 milhões de euros adicionais para reforçar estas capacidades. Continuaremos com o nosso compromisso e com uma política séria de redução do risco de incêndios, que é um trabalho que não desaparece, nem pode desaparecer, como ontem disse o Sr. Presidente da AGIF, por uma varinha de condão. Não. Exige, de facto, um esforço sistémico de todas e de todos nós. Mas importa manter este compromisso firme com todas as entidades. E eu tenho, por isso, a firme convicção, estou mesmo profundamente convicto, que o trabalho que tem vindo a ser desenvolvido nas diferentes organizações internacionais, na Organização das Nações Unidas, na União Europeia, em conferências como esta que estamos aqui a realizar, é mesmo um trabalho fundamental para contribuir para aquela que é a mudança mais difícil de fazer. É a mudança das mentalidades. Porque termino como comecei. De facto, ou alteramos a forma de olhar, de valorizar os recursos que a natureza nos proporciona de forma sustentada, de forma equilibrada, de forma harmoniosa, como desde a década de 70, com o relatório Brundtland foi assinalado, ou dificilmente conseguiremos desenvolver as ferramentas, os instrumentos para vencer o tempo que nos escasseia e que nos falta para enfrentar a complexidade dos riscos naturais que temos que enfrentar, entre os quais estão naturalmente os incêndios rurais. Agradeço à AGIF pelo trabalho que tem vindo a desenvolver, agradeço a presença de tantas e de tantos convidados em Portugal, que é para nós uma honra receber-vos neste país que enfrenta também esta complexidade dos incêndios rurais e manifestar com humildade a nossa vontade e disponibilidade para participar nesta reflexão que nos conduza a um maior conhecimento e à melhoria das políticas públicas de desenvolvimento integrado e sustentado da nossa biodiversidade e do nosso património ambiental. Bem-aja e muito obrigado. E agora então vamos passar para o nosso diálogo conjunto. Muito obrigado.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to focus on our topic for today, integrated fire management, which has been informally defined as the attempt to obtain the maximum benefits from good fire and minimizing the damages from bad fire. More formally, it's seen as a chain of processes that starts in planning and develops throughout a series of activities down to post-fire rehabilitation. And I think that in Portugal, in recent years, we have made very substantial conceptual progresses, and also in the planning stage, the situation is not as good or advanced at other stages of the process. But quite recently, the national slogan was "Portugal without fires depends on you all." And that has evolved. So that slogan really revealed a lack of recognition for the possibility of good fire. All fire was deemed bad fire. Conceptually, we have made substantial progress, as we have made also substantial conceptual progress at another level when we have an agency that addresses rural fires and no longer forest fires. That means an evolution from seeing the problem as a vertical problem, a sectoral problem of forestry, and now it's seen much more as a regional, as a territorial problem that involves agricultural areas, peri-urban areas, pastures and shrublands. So it's again a conceptual redefinition that takes our vision of the issue to not only an integration along sectors of the economy or sectors of the government organizational flow chart, but also into geographical space and territorial space, which is where the actual interventions have to happen. And so I think that from this standpoint, we have been making substantial progress. But there are some things that I think we need to work more on. And in your address, you mentioned some of them, like the relationships between fire suppression and fire prevention, which correspond to agencies that are different pillars of the national system for integrated fire management. And I was part of the team of academics that your ministry convened to develop a report on the large fires of last summer. And that was one of the issues that was identified, were situations where there was not that much integration between prevention and suppression. The work that had been done in terms of prevention doesn't seem to have been that extensively used to support suppression. I'm worried that, and I recently listened to a chat that Mark Castelnau had with some colleagues that's available in YouTube, where one of the things you talked about was the fact that we already have what's called 6th generation extreme fires, and we're entering the 7th generation extreme fires, which are typical of conditions of very extreme atmospheric instability and that generate extreme behaviors. As the environment is evolving in this direction, and I'm going to start from my left to my, I'm not in a central position, from my left to my far left, how do you see this complementarity and this relationship between firefighting and fire prevention landscape management, which is the main goal here, landscape fires. How does it need to evolve, or do we even know how it needs to evolve under this scenario that is becoming increasingly more favorable to very extreme events, Gary? The 2019-20 Australian fire season also, I'm sure, has some important lessons in that regard.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Yes, well, certainly in Australia we had significant fires through that period, and there are a lot of lessons learnt from it and a lot of mistakes made. Mm-hmm. And a lot of lessons will have to be relearnt. It seems that we go through generations of learning, forgetting about the lessons and going again. Stephen Pine gave us a great lecture yesterday, and if anyone has never read his books, you should read his books, because if we don't learn from history, we're going to be condemned by history, because the same things occur again. But there are some positives coming out of it, and the positives are the reaffirmation that there's a need to get back away from fire suppression focus to managing the landscape, and that is putting fire into the landscape as it used to be. And putting that back in and managing the land is going to reduce the extent of the wildfires. It's also going to reduce the cost to government for suppressing the wildfires, and it's going to provide a better biodiversity long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mark, may we hear you on this, please?
Well, I totally agree with we need to get away from the fire suppression, because that is what is building up our problematic landscapes, and we've learned that through the last decades. But it seems to me that although we need to learn from history, or history will teach us, that we need to learn from everybody. We are not building a global fire community. So back in 2020, after the biggest Californian season or burn scar we've seen in the last century, so I was discussing with Californian people about where we need to go from here and what we need to learn, and all that's new. But I say, well, it's not new. So you have everything you need to have there. The only thing you don't have is the willing to learn from everybody else. I mean, Portugal has been through, Bolivia has been through, Australia has been through. So we look too much at our problem in our conditions, and the ecosystems worldwide are going through a change, and to a change in fire dynamics, and the problem is the same everywhere, but with different colors because we have different organizations. But we need to share all those lessons, because if not, there is no way to learn at the pace the change is happening. And that's a dramatic event. And that's what I think that we need, all of us. We should be discussing what the fires from Alberta right now, they mean for the fires in Catalonia or in Portugal that are coming this summer. We're not doing that exercise, but we should be doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of effort we need to do. It means we need to go back down to from our position and be able to ask the questions of what we need to go, where we need to go, because we are in a creative moment, not in a defensive moment, and we are still reacting to all the problems in a defensive mode. And we need to be creating the future, and that's what we need to learn how to do.
Yeah, yeah. Judy, Canada is also delivering lots of examples and food for thought. I'm thinking not only about Fort McMurray, but the heat dome last summer, was it? Or not even summer, over Western Canada, that I think is already being replicated this year and generating very extreme situations. What is your take on this issue? Because, I mean, bringing things back to focusing back on the Portuguese context, we are starting to integrate prevention and suppression. But like Mark is saying, we're doing it a bit reactively. We're kind of like those generals that people say that they're always planning how to win the last war and not the next war. I feel that we are pretty much behaving along that pattern. What are the thoughts and proposals from Canada?
So Canada developed an original Canadian wildland fire strategy in 2006. But in 2016, we needed to renew and refresh that because things were changing faster than forestry and fire management agencies had really anticipated. And we knew we needed to shift given the catastrophic wildfires and these heat domes. We actually had fatalities in Canada related to those heat domes that had nothing to do with fire. We also had air sheds that were smoked out for very extensive periods of time, which means we need to change a lot of things around business code, building codes, how we approach evacuation or shelter within, because we don't have building codes that will withstand long-term smoke exposure for our people. It's far less expensive to shelter in place than continually evacuate, and our Indigenous communities don't want to be evacuated all the time. So we have challenges too. In 2021 through 2026, there was a further renewal of our strategic approach. We needed to always renew political will. And we needed it integrated across a variety of ministries, not just forestry, who have typically worn the brunt of things in Canada. We needed our transportation ministries, our civil defense ministries, our ministries responsible for local governments, municipal governments, all engaged. So a whole of government and all sector approach really needed to transpire. We had seen forestry really the responsible agency, and now we needed to shift. In British Columbia alone, there were hundreds of oil and gas projects developed without any consultation and an expectation that our fire suppression side would actually be able to manage protecting all those values at risk, all the development across our land base. And it was impossible without augmenting our physical resources or providing fire smart mechanisms that need to be put in place. That's what we've seen in the implementation of a 2021-26 action plan. I was telling Gary earlier that one of the things I'm really excited about is we have minister mandate letters. They define what a minister needs to deliver over the term of his elected term. And we've seen a lead from a ministerial perspective, but we've seen that other ministers have obligations to support that minister as a lead. The part I'm really excited about is we have a 4-year elected term in Canada. It's too short to actually do the prevention, mitigation, and even recovery that we need to. We lost entire villages last year, or the year before. We were starting to see ministers propose not only the first term, but activities all the way through second term. So I'm really excited about being able to move and shift in the long term with a long-term commitment.
And so that would go very much along the lines of what our minister mentioned on the need for, as much as possible, a national consensus that goes beyond the narrow limits of a single political mandate, even when, or especially when there are shifts in the parties in power in government, is that there really should be longer term goals and stability in working towards them, because these are not short-term issues. No. And if we don't do anything, they're not going to sort themselves out. They're only going to get increasingly worse. Lara, what is the perspective from Brazil? Do these same issues also apply in a tropical context? What are the big issues related with integrated fire management? I was, a little while ago, I was mentioning that until recently we had this slogan, Portugal without fires depends on you all. In Brazil, until very recently, 2015, I believe you had a zero fire policy, and now you have abandoned that and you are moving towards integrated fire management. Is it being applied widespread throughout the whole country, or are there pilot areas where you're starting to experiment with it? How is that experience unfolding? Does integrated fire management appear feasible and useful in Brazil?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yes, Brazil is going through a process of changing from this zero fire policy to the integrated fire management. And what I think that really is helping Brazil to go in this way is the work that Brazil is doing with communities. Because from indigenous communities, the agencies in Brazil started to learn how to manage fires in the territories. And from this knowledge, it was possible to build a proposal for a national policy on integrated fire management. And this policy is now in the National Congress being discussed. And yesterday we received the information that this, I think today they are going to discuss this in the National Congress, this document. But if you allow me, because I come from Brazil, but now I'm representing here FAO, and I would like to bring also a little bit of this global perspective, because FAO is also working with the idea of the integrated fire management, with this holistic approach, looking to all aspects that the fire includes, the fire management, ecology of fire, and the culture of fire. And we are boosting this approach in FAO and in the support that we give to the countries through 5 elements that we call the 5 R's. That is review and analysis. So we have to understand what is really going on with fire in a region, in a territory, in a country. And so risk reduction, so try to minimize or eliminate the ignitions. And so readiness, because we are not going, unfortunately, to stop all fires, all wildfires, so we have to prepare for that. And so response, and finally recovery. And so this is the approach that we are boosting. And for making prevention and suppression more close, I think that we have to look deeply in this integrated fire management and really work with all the aspects of this. And the spaces like that of this conference is very important, because we have here people from science, we have here practitioners, we have here firefighters, we have community representatives, we have private sector. And so this is a forum where we can discuss the different perspectives related to fire, and we can build better strategies. In the last conference that was in 2019 in Brazil, I was that time working there and involved in the organization of the conference. We started to talk about the dialogue of knowledge. And it's exactly that. Everyone, every agency, every stakeholder involved in fire, bring it to the same table, their own perspectives. And from that, we can create better strategies and achieve better results at the end, and minimize the damage and loss caused by wildfires, extreme wildfires. Thank you.
Gary, I understand that you would like to share some information, additional.
Yes, I can.
Would you
Sure.
like to go up and
Thank you.
do that, please.
Thank you, Jose. And also thanks to the International Liaison Committee, particularly Tiago, for bringing us all together. If I look around the room, just while we were having that discussion there, I think, what a wealth of knowledge we've got here and a wealth of experience. If we could bottle it all up into one person, wow, what a person that would be, and wouldn't we solve the wonders of the world? We know it's not possible, but we shouldn't leave here unless we've had the opportunity to interact with one another. The Minister talked about having a mindset change and about cooperation and cohesion. And I firmly believe that. I'm a sociable person and I like to catch up with people, and I believe that's one of the best ways we can start to learn from people and interact with one another. And I'll just tell you a little story. Denny Truesdale, who used to be chair of the ILC before Gordy, we were in Sydney preparing for the 3rd International Wildland Fire Conference, and we went out to a nice restaurant and we were planning out what to do for the 3rd International Wildland Fire Conference, and we decided about having a summit afterwards. So Denny was full of these bright ideas, and fortunately we had butcher's paper to write on rather than a cloth napkin, so I was able to take away the smart ideas at the end of the night. One thing he did say that I do remember was that relationships come first before formal agreements. Relationships come first before formal agreements. In other words, we need to understand one another's working environments and how they interact with the communities. And we've got to understand one another's perspectives before we actually get to the stage of developing truly cooperative arrangements. So I encourage everybody here to go out there, interact with one another, particularly from other countries, because you'll learn from other people and go away and keep those networking going for long term, because I think that's really important, so we broaden our horizons. Go and look at the sponsors. They're out there in the exhibitions. They're the ones that are going to give us some other ideas. But if we look across the globe, there's many regions where humans have used fire for many years, and the environments have been shaped by those fires. And we all know that wildfires can be as diverse as the environments that they are within. And we also know that no single fire regime is optimum for all organisms. So we have to be careful and we have to know what we're doing. We have to understand the landscape, have to understand the biodiversity and what we're putting fire in the environment for, or why we're stopping to put fire. Because we do know some fire regimes, including fire exclusion, together with threatening processes such as fragmentation, invasion of weeds and exotic pests, they can also threaten biodiversity. Globally, we see peat fires burning and emitting huge volumes of smoke. So they're not just affecting the country from which they're burning in, but they're affecting other countries through air quality, affecting human health, and also affecting traffic issues. Long-term impacts also include accelerating climate change and lowering the importance of the peat ecosystems. So those countries, they suffer. But is their focus correct? When the people there call for more resources, whether it's from the media, whether it's from the politicians or the fire services, calling for more resources to focus more on the fire suppression? Or are they looking at the consequences of other misactions, seeking short-term fixes? Perhaps they're looking for someone to blame. Perhaps they should address the root causes rather than the symptoms. Now, what happens in peatland happens in many other ecosystems. I've just used that as an example, certainly true in my country. Well, I was fortunate enough to be here in Portugal last November and made some observations, a report which is available on the web. But what I did notice was that Portugal is not addressing the land management issues properly. There's a focus on fire suppression. It needs to change the balance across to land management, using fire in the environment. I notice that on the suppression side, ICS is not being truly applied correctly at this stage. Thirdly, the major thing that I'd noticed was that there are people willing to share these observations and willing to listen. So I've got plenty of hope that Portugal is going to move ahead into the future, because of the smart leaders who are listening, and people were listening. I mean, of course, there'll be people who are defensive and won't want to make change, but they're not the leaders of the future. So perhaps we also need to, in my view, redefine the wildfire problem, or place it in a different context, or look at it differently. I put to you that wildland wildfire is not a one-dimensional problem, and I believe firmly that we can learn from our recent history if we're prepared to learn from the mistakes and the successes of others. Perhaps even more from the Indigenous folk who maintain a connection with the land and can actually transfer knowledge from ancestral and cultural traditions. In many locations, no matter how we try to prevent wildland fires, they're going to continue to happen. So, how can we reduce the risk? Globally, I believe we need to address the primary causes of wildland fires, and at the same time acknowledge that some environments, wildland fires are essential for ecosystems to survive long term. Therefore, what should our goal be? I suggest that we need to have all governments to understand the need to implement improvements in landscape fire management in order to, 1, build fire-resistant landscapes and protect the communities and the industries, and secondly, to minimise the unwanted smoke in the atmosphere for public health and slow down global warming. So, what are the main factors causing our wildland wildfires that we Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen here. So, globally, what are the root causes and what can we do about it? And where should our goal be? And what are the main factors that are causing us that we need to address? To me, there are many elements that contribute to wildland fires. There's political policies, particularly fire exclusion policies, and those which prevent local people having an involvement in undertaking prevention actions. There's urban planning, and an example being placing dwellings too close to vegetation and not allowing sufficient opportunities for those who are managing the vegetated landscape surrounding the urban environment to get in there and reduce the fuels and protect the urban dwellings. There's change in land management practices. We're seeing agricultural changes, land abandonment, risk-averse management, all which lead to increasing the fire risk. And then there's legality side of things that stop or hinder prevention activities occurring properly. There's resource competencies. People improperly trained, not accredited, not for the task at hand, or not having suitable equipment, aircraft, or the necessary other technologies that have come available. Then there's the community side, not being involved, not taking prevention actions to share the risk with fire organisations. We need all the governments to have an integrated fire management policies to achieve these goals. So I say to the Minister that wildland fires are not only an emergency response issue. Governments need to bring together people with expertise from many areas of focus so that they can combine their knowledge in an integrated manner to meet government expectations. What I am talking about is expertise including within multiple areas of expertise as shown in the slide. It is complex and it all needs to be well thought through, but it can be done. Anyone who thinks that they have the expertise in all those areas is deluding themselves. They will fail and the consequences will affect us all. So what we do need is collaboration and cooperation. Living in a wildland fire-prone landscape comes with risks, and to me, wildfire is only one of those risks. We can't eliminate wildfire, but we can minimise the risks by working together and having shared understanding of the wildfire risk and our responsibilities in managing wildfire. If individuals, communities and organisations meaningfully engage and plan together with strong cooperation towards common goals, then positive results will happen. However, to be confident that success is realised, there needs to be a means of measuring performance towards the common goals. I'll provide an example later. But first, if I have a look around the audience today, put your hands up, those of you who have had at least 10 years of fire suppression experience. Put your hands up. Keep your hands up if you've got at least 10 years experience in prescribed burning. Wonderful. These are the people who we should be listening to. These are the people who are going to guide us on how we're going to manage the landscape into the future. They're the people who we should be going to for their knowledge and experience. So, I just encourage you all to listen and have engagement with those people. Of those people who had their hands up in the last category, who of you would attend a fire in a high-rise building with a fire occurring between the 39th and the 40th floors? Not one, just as I expected. We can't do it. Yes, you'd be crazy to think that just because you're confident in one type of fire, that you're confident in all firefighting, because you can't. Be crazy. Just to digress a little bit, I went to a lecture on craniology, and that's the operations involved in the surgical manipulation of the skull. Now, some of you may have seen images of this in the media. This craniology lecture was explained how they successfully overcome the pulling apart of these twins over 18 months with numerous surgeries. Of course, it was not one surgeon, but a highly skilled train of surgeons, all from different specialty areas of medicine, all working together to improve patients' lives. And not one of those highly competent surgeons was comfortable to undertake the total operation by themselves. They all acknowledged that they need the most appropriately skilled and experienced surgeon to operate at each particular stage of the operation within their area of expertise. So, why is it that some people placed in positions of responsibility for wildland fires without any commensurate level of knowledge and experience think that they can be capable to be in charge of suppression forces for landscape scale vegetation fires? When will we wake up and acknowledge that no one has all the skills and experience to cover every eventuality? To me, I believe smart firefighters know and follow a common goal, and they have a team of highly appropriately skilled people working together in cooperation, each being tasked to complete their role, supported by the team, and they'll actually bring about the desired results. I understand that some organisations use the term incident commander and others use incident controller. So today I'm just going to call it the IC, in other words, the person in charge of the incident management team. So how often do we see an IC who operates like a hands-on leader, who thinks that they are the only one who can actually lead people and they know everything and can do everything? Perhaps that's simply adult vanity, thinking we can do everything well. Certainly our young children, as toddlers, they believe mum and dad can do everything well. They reckon they're superhuman. That is, until they grow up and they become a teenager. Then they question mum and dad, and they think mum and dad are frauds or they've totally misjudged them. and yet we think we can still tell teenagers what to do. I do know the best ICs know their strengths and weaknesses. They know and they ensure that they have people in the incident management team who are experts in their areas of weaknesses or outside their area of expertise. And they delegate clearly defined objectives to the team members for them to complete. So one of the biggest lessons for leaders is also to be able to navigate uncertainty. In wildfire suppression, the IC operates with much uncertainty. I imagine, Minister, it's a bit like you operating in areas of uncertainty. They still have to go on and work it all through, but ICs don't have all the information, and they can't be expected to do so. What they do need to have is clearly formulated and communicated strategic directions and goals for their incident management team. It is others within the incident management team who will actually complete what that strategic direction is. Most of you probably know about the principle of subsidiarity. Well, it works well in incident management teams. If we want the optimum results from wildfires suppression for our communities and the environment, then we must acknowledge that the people within the IMT are properly trained to a common standard, tested and accredited. They have sufficient technical expertise derived from research and then translated into education programs for training personnel, recent field experience to undertake the role so they maintain their currency, are reasonably physically and mentally fit to cope with the high pressures within the incident management team, and have a willingness to accept and respect others within the incident management team who are from other organisations, other jurisdictions or other countries, and are prepared to accept and be responsible to the team for their role within the incident management team. To me, there is no place for power-driven politics in fire suppression strategies and actions. There is no I in team. Success comes from collaboration and cooperation. Appreciating all the differences that they are working towards one common goal. So combining under a single focus in an integrated manner will always provide greater achievements. Now I wish to move forward from the fire suppression or operational side of integrated fire management towards a holistic system or package that is necessary for the success of fire management in the landscape. I explained earlier that managing risks associated with wildland wildfires is complicated, but it is possible. So what I wish to provide is a package of documents for you, which are all accessible on the web, and it can be used in different countries, of course, with adaptations, because we've all got slight differences, but they can help to guide organisations to improve management roles in the landscape. What I have on the screen is simply examples of what you may find useful when considering adopting landscape governance framework, which will be discussed later in the conference. Many of you will have similar documents.
Gary, sorry to interrupt you. I would like to get back to the debate. So how much more time will you need?
5?
5 minutes?
Yep.
I would appreciate if you could shorten that a bit.
Sure. Okay. Well, this package is all available, and clearly it will help people where they go. I'll just say, I'll skip that one too. In Australia, we have a national policy, like most of you would have, but we never had the opportunity to actually measure whether we're actually achieving the goals within the national policy. We actually do now. We've formulated a set of objectives and key performance indicators. They won't be directly applicable to all your countries, but they may help you look at how you could assess whether you're meeting the goals within your country. And the other side is that all those complex issues, they all come together, and it is needing people from different organisations within government and in communities working towards the common goals. And it can't be done over a 12-month period. It's got to be done over 5, 10 years to see whether the trends are going in the right directions. So I put that towards you. And just say that by having something like this, it does provide a means of where Australia can work towards other international objectives and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase terrestrial carbon pools for the Australia's vegetation, and make sure that unique ecosystems will flourish into the future. And it makes wildfires safer for everybody. I'll keep moving because it does move on to those conventions. I do wish to share with you something which is an example where local Indigenous community is being encouraged to take responsibility for land management, including wildland fires. Not far off the coast from Brisbane, the capital city of Queensland, in the northern part of Australia, is an island called North Stradbroke Island. It was previously managed by a government agency for tourism, and it's got high value built assets on the land, but it's got also good biodiversity. Well, this is being handed over to the Indigenous community to manage the landscape, including the wildland fires. It is a pilot, and the program aims to change the previously focus on wildfire suppression to actually putting fire into the landscape on a regular basis, and that's going to have many beneficial benefits and will certainly enhance the biodiversity as well. It is going to be a major test of legalities and also the impact on the economic, ecological and social aspects of the island. I wish them all the best in their outcome. Now to conclude for you, I'd like to just say how many countries are running the risk of spending ever-increasing amounts of money on wildfire suppression while becoming even less successful in managing the landscape. If we are truthful, many of us are in that situation. And globally, there is considerable scope for improving the efficiency and effectiveness of current approaches to wildland wildfire management. I believe that it is time for us to rediscover the relationship between appropriate year-round management of the landscape and wildfire suppression. And there is a need for us to develop a more strategic approach to the management of urban growth in the rural environment. We need better ways of sharing risks and costs associated with prevention activities to reduce wildland wildfire impacts in the rural-urban intermix, particularly when associated with land abandonment. All our wildland fire and land management policies must be underpinned by quality research, and with the advent of climate change, is becoming increasingly futile in many localities to develop policies in areas ranging from water and biodiversity conservation to urban planning, carbon sequestration and the maintenance of key aspects of an Indigenous culture without first analysing wildland fire management considerations. And finally, I suggest that there is a need for ongoing international policy dialogue to broaden the understanding among policymakers and the wider community of the key issues involved, and a greater scope exists for greater fire-related cooperation both within countries and internationally.
Okay, so I have prepared a couple more questions, but I just seen in the iPad that some of them are going to be or were addressed by our audience. So I want to leave the final 20 minutes for interaction with the audience. So I'll skip those questions. But I would like to get back to our minister, and if you allow me, I'll ask you a question, not just in your capacity as minister, but also as a political scientist, someone who has a doctoral degree in political science. I get the impression that in this effort towards promoting integrated fire management, we are focusing very heavily in the natural environment, in the social environment, in the economic environment, and all of that. But aren't organizations themselves and organizations as such a bit of a blind spot in this process? Aren't we ignoring all the idiosyncrasies and peculiarities and complexities of the internal workings of organizations? And aren't we, and when I say we, maybe I'm focusing primarily on the academic community, aren't we assuming that just sharing information and providing information will solve the problems? Aren't we working on this assumption that many things aren't happening because people lack information, and if they are provided with information, somehow, perhaps a bit magically, things will start happening? But organizations are internally very complex, sometimes even conflicting. You're a government member. Organizations, and so aren't we underestimating the importance of the internal structure and priorities and inertia inherent in the workings of organizations for us to be able to successfully implementing such a strategy that is so demanding from organizations and that requires such important shifts in their goals and structures and priorities?
Thank you very much for your question. It's very important, the question, and it's a characteristic of our system. Is the reason why I said that it's very important that we look to this question without preconcepts and with great objectivity. We have a system, and this system is integrated, is multi-level, because we have great responsibilities in high administration, but we have great responsibilities in our law of civil protection in the basis of the system, that it's in local powers, in the municipalities. The municipalities are probably one of the most important elements of this system. And allow me that I said that we have three gains during these last 5 years. In the knowledge, we have more knowledge about the causes of the wildfires. We have more knowledge about the suppression. And we have more cooperation between the actors. And to this cooperation, to enhance this cooperation, this framework of cooperation, it was very important, the creation of AGIF. And it's very important, the function in the systemic perspective that has the AGIF in the promotion of the dialogue between all actors. They have the mainly function is the promotion of the knowledge, of the dialogue and the cooperation between the actors, and then the national civil protection, the authority in the civil protection, that has a great responsibility in the integration to the suppression and to the natural risks. It's more, I can say that it's the principal responsibility of the National Authority for Civil Protection. Duarte Costa is our responsible for this institution, and it's important the dialogue between National Authority of Civil Protection with the Ministry of Environment, with the ECNF. There are the two mainly institutions that contribute to the system that has a characteristic that is the multi-level organization and the subsidiarity principle that organizes the system. It's a basis. I suppose that it's essence of the system. But let me say that if you ask me, but it needs more cooperation. Yes, was the reason why I said that it's important a consensus, national consensus between the forces, all services, all centers of knowledge to give input to the system in the knowledge. And it's important that this knowledge allow us to implement, to give the implementation to new models of understanding. Because I suppose that in this moment, our mainly need is the reason why the European Union is working on that, is how to manage the great complexity that we have in the wildfire because the climate change. Because we feel the institutions give information to the responsibles that has the responsibility to decide, and they say us that the more the great difficulty is to understand and to manage the great complexity of these wildfires, because they are very, very strange in their nature because the climate change. Then we need to promote. You ask me, but it's we have a pluralistic system, if we can use this conception. Yes, we have a pluralistic system, but each element that is our President of National Authority of Civil Protection, General Eduardo Costa, says every time, we have a system of the systems. It's true, we have many subsystems that integrate a great system, and each subsystem or each element of this system contributes with their nature, with their functions in the global system. But if you ask me, but what do we need to improve? I said, first, enhance our dialogue and cooperation between all the elements. Second, promote the integration between the structural prevention, agriculture, environment, cohesion, resilience of our local communities, and promote this structural prevention and integrate with the immediate prevention. That is the responsibility that has the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the immediate prevention, information, sensibilization, fiscalization of the system, and the used authority. But we need to integrate these two dimensions. And as said, the knowledge, we must integrate to promote the enhancing in the system in the integration that we have in the terrain between the protection of the local communities, the people and their patrimony, and the front line in the combat in the forest. To integrate, give a good integration between these two dimensions in the suppression. And these need more capacity.
Yeah.
Capacity to the complexity. I suppose that there are the two words that can give a good synthesis of this, is promote more capacitation to complexity and integrate the response of the system.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mark, in Catalonia, and based on the way your system is organized, do you also have these issues of sometimes lack of integration between the priorities for fire suppression and fire prevention? this issue that we have in Portugal, that we often feel that firefighting is very heavily focused, very heavily concentrated on protecting the built-up space and undervalues the rest of the territory. Do you also have that issue in Catalonia? And if so, how do you, if not, why not? And if so, how do you deal with it?
We do have the same problem. I mean, almost 90% of efforts in our forest goes to suppression, and we are trying to shift that into prevention. But the funny thing is that the pressure to shift the budget to landscape management comes from the fire service and not from the biodiversity management. I mean, so we understand that we need to manage our ecosystems because our ecosystems are changing. So our ecosystems needs to renovate because climate change it's changing the conditions that forests grow. So a lot of our forests were burned 1 century ago with a different climate in a process of rural abandonment, and those forests now are under stress, and they really burn really well because they need to be managed or either be adapted to. So in all that process, if you look at the long term, we are saying as a forest service that we don't need more resources, we don't want more resources, and that's a powerful message coming from a fire service, saying what I need is a landscape management to make my people be able to fight fire and protect the assets on the landscape. But the problem of managing the landscape comes from all the legislations we're applying in Europe to protect our forests and our biodiversity. So we are protecting the individuals and not the population. So our laws are making a priority of protecting one individual of one species and not the population. So to protect the individuals, we are putting all the populations at risk. And that concept, the risk, it has to be translated into a kind of what you need to lose to protect what. This is a trade-off. And understanding that trade-off is where the cooperation comes in. And that means understanding fire behavior and understanding the challenge we are facing and understanding the challenge our society will be facing if we don't solve the problem now. But the problem is that we politically, like everywhere in Europe, we are focused on our daily responsibilities and not in the responsibilities we will pass to the next one in our position. So during my lifetime in the fire service, I've seen my landscape go from 35% forest to 70% forest. It doubled in my lifetime. And it's the same fire service. So that's a crazy thing to have. And the same for the fires, the fire size and the fire intensity. So we cannot cope with those fire behavior and those fire regimes. And although we are saying that, our society is still not willing to accept because they are still saying we have to protect our biodiversity. But the message is we have to protect our ecosystems to be able to have biodiversity in the future, because if not, we will wipe out them in an event like the Australian one in 2019-20 or the one in Portugal. So that's the main problem. We do have those problems of integration, but the main problem is that we are still discussing information. And what we need is to have knowledge and discuss about the know-how. And in this process, we're losing the know-how of landscape management. And the issue is that our politicians and our society only have knowledge and know-how about suppression already, and we have to bring back all the landscape management and all the old ways.
Certainly.
So it's a complex problem, it's a social problem, but we have to understand, and that's something I'm explaining my politicians, that, for example, last summer we were successful. We were on the Pyrenees, we've been saying we will lose the Pyrenees, we will see fires, 500,000 hectares there. So last summer in June, we were by a lightning storm with almost 50 different wildfires all in the Pyrenees. We were almost close to lose 100,000 hectares. Well, just this close. That was celebrated like an achievement by the suppression. But the problem is that we didn't eliminate any uncertainty. We are at the same point we were last year, but 1 year after, and the drought is deeper, and the weather is worse. So the point is, what are we solving? We have to decide what we want to solve. We want to solve the problem today, or we do want to solve the problem we are facing. It's my individual problem, or it's our society problem. So we have to understand that either we succeed as a team, or we will completely fail as individuals. And that's the challenge we have.
Thank you. Judy, this issue of this tension between focusing the fire suppression effort on the protection of communities, of built-up spaces, versus the protection of the rest of the land, let's say of the natural environment. Is this also an issue in terms of integrated fire management in Canada?
Absolutely. But to the point now where our suppression resources are only protecting, structural values at risk at certain points in time by addressing fire in the adjacent wildlands, especially during seasons such as the catastrophic ones.
Yeah.
You don't have time to protect forest resources anymore. So that's a really interesting one. Even if the forests themselves and their flammability is something we need to manage from a prevention mitigation perspective. So the action plan that I was speaking to in 2021 through 2026 absolutely calls for a refocus on prevention and mitigation activities. One of the challenges we have is mobilizing our fire smart tools, and you can take a look at those through our team that's here at the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, who used to be a suppression resource broker only. And they're not just doing that anymore. Yeah. We need to advance all 7 disciplines of Fire Smart. And so they're changing their focus as an organization, and that's what the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers want. But one of the challenges we have is we need communities to have community protection plans. And it's communities that need to be fully engaged in all 7 disciplines of Fire Smart. And, the municipal governments are busy with water supply, transportation, they have a lot on their plate, and they don't have the technical expertise that's necessarily required. And so we need to be able to facilitate that and capacity build and help actually deliver that with and for those local governments. And we need to pay particular attention to our Indigenous communities who are looking for self-governance around these things and who want to do things their way. And so supporting that whole of government, all sector approach is really important.
Thank you. Lara, what is the FAO perspective on integrated fire management in Southern Europe? If we can, I don't know if the question makes sense from your standpoint. We have a similar set of problems and issues with being a hotspot for climate change, rural land abandonment, and very structuring elements of the problem. How does FAO look at this effort and this issue of integrated fire management in Southern Europe? What do you see as the main difficulties and the main challenges?
I think that in all regions in the world, we have similar problems and specific problems, and maybe what happened also in Europe is related to this sometimes focus on suppression and not on prevention issues, and also with this abandonment of the rural areas here. It's necessary to have public policies to improve this issue. I was talking yesterday, I think, with someone from Spain, or from Portugal, sorry, but there is an interest in public policies it's in Portugal, to make that people go back to the rural areas in order to manage the land and help with this problem with fires, with wildfires. And so I think that in each part of the world you are, in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa, what is really needed, as I said before, is to look deeply in the integrated fire management aspects and really use all of them, work on all of them. And also what the FAO is doing, we are, together with UNEP, we are working in the development of a global fire management hub. This hub will be launched in the closing ceremony, so don't miss that. And the idea of this hub is to put all these positive experiences that we have around the world, experiences in Latin America, in Australia, in Africa, in Europe, put all this in one place so one country, one region can learn from each other, and from that build their own strategies, their own public policies. And one of the main, and this hub initially have 5 pillars, and one of these pillars that for me it's, let's say, the most important is wildfire resilient communities. And in this pillar, we are bringing together all traditional knowledge, all indigenous knowledge on fire management, the engagement of the communities, promoting gender, diversity, inclusion. And so I envisage that this hub will really help at the global level to improve the integrated fire management in our regions. This will take time, of course, but we are starting this hub now. And let's say in a couple of years, maybe we can have really good results in all regions, taking advantages of the good experience that we already have around the world. Okay. And as in the beginning, we were talking about the experience in Brazil, but also in Latin America, we have Ecuador with amazing experiences. And so all this in the same place for everyone, this is amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to move to a few questions from the audience. I apologize, we won't be able to address them all. I'll start with a question for Mark. How do you manage the technical information from different agencies to support your team to mitigate, prepare, and suppress the fires?
Well, we need to understand that fire is fire everywhere, and if we translate the information into know-how, then it's a lot easier to do. So, but the problem is that we are not at this level. So we learn that we need to have if we want to confront situations we are not having enough experience with. So if I am waiting for my firefighters to have the fire on the Pyrenees of 300,000–400,000 hectares, that will be the first time in their life they will confronting it. So the only way they can learn of it is that getting the experience of people that is already confronting that in Australia, or in South America, or in North America, or in Africa. So when you get at that point, and you get at that point of evaluation, and you get to that kind of knowledge, then it's easy to integrate that in your decision making. So my fire analysts are looking at the Alberta fires right now and using that as an exercise. But that's not normal procedure. It's not about the information. It's about the translation into know-how, and that's the same everywhere around the world. So one thing that it doesn't make me happy, and it's not part of the question, but I think it needs to be said, is that the center we've been said about FAO, I think it's a good initiative. But the problem in that is that sometimes we are not willing to learn until we have been through the problem and failed. And that's what such a center should address. And the main problem is here in the European Union. You don't have to go far away. So northern countries in Europe are only willing to learn about suppression knowledge because they are starting to suppress fires, but they are not willing to learn about the lessons. We are explaining them that we are just saying suppression is not the solution. We need to manage landscape. So they are in a point, they still have a landscape, they can avoid the big fires, but they're abandoning the landscape and building the forest to get the big fires, and later on we'll come back for the lessons. So it's not about the lessons, it's about the willingness to learn, and that's what we need to teach our people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Question that I find very interesting. In areas that are just starting to have wildfire problems, how do we avoid the mistake of putting all our resources in suppression? Suppression is what is seen as the important thing by politicians, for example, in the Czech Republic, and the thing that is easily demonstrated to the public. But we, scientists, know that we should also heavily focus on prevention. So how do we help people avoiding repeating the, I wouldn't call them errors, but the biases on focus that other countries have seen themselves doing? Gary, would you care to comment? Short answer, please. We're short on time.
Yeah, fairly quickly, I'd just say if countries didn't have many fires in the past, certainly we've got climate change coming and that's altering it. Have they looked at their landscape to say, what do we want to manage the landscape for into the future? Is that going to involve fire or not fire? If it is going to involve fire, we as humans put fire into the environment so that we can manage it and make the landscape resilient to fires in the future? Big question, don't have the answer. The individual country has to look at that for their answer. But it is about land management rather than fire suppression.
Judy, maybe in Canada you have thought about this. How should we address the political tension between the aim to sequester more carbon on our landscapes with fire prevention, and how do we balance that with fire prevention, fuel hazard reduction, and prescribed burning?
In 5 seconds or less.
Yes, exactly.
So, wow, that's a complicated question in that, on the one hand, we're looking at land and forest management practices in particular that will optimize carbon on the landscape. And on the other, you're trying to make sure that your landscapes are resilient. So both fuel treatment and prescribed fire, whether it's prescribed or natural prescribed fire. So you've got to use all of those tools, but I would argue that you're going to lose more carbon in severe fire events than you will low-intensity fire events. And so we have science that can deal with those calculations. And I think they can, the science can be defended. I think the other thing is fuel treatments, in particular, can mobilize carbon from the land into long-term sequestered products that then can cycle through our economies. So we don't think of fiber as, just harvesting a tree and turning it into 2x4s or structural elements in buildings anymore. We need to recycle them and reuse them. And if we can sequester those products and carbon in them for the long term, then there's a positive as well. So we're looking at fuel treatments actually being a good carbon construct, especially when you compare it to severe wildfire.
Very good, thank you. I have another question that I would like to air here, but I'm not sure exactly to whom address it, so if you feel comfortable answering, I'd appreciate that. Can we keep pushing for prescribed burning as a cure-all without a full understanding of the short-term air quality impacts to society? I think in Portugal, for example, we're still very far from that being a major concern because we're doing so little prescribed burning. But I mean, this is from a preventive point of view. How do we manage, how do we balance these potentially conflicting priorities? I know that we don't have anyone from the United States here, but I know that for the U.S. Forest Service, smoke management is a major issue. Lara, in FAO, have you dealt with situations where this is a more present concern, and how is it being addressed?
Yeah, I think that the way to manage that is, as you said, manage the smoke. And in some countries, the places where prescribed burnings are happening are far away from cities. This is the reality, for example, in Latin America. But I think that there are this smoke management, and also it's important to inform the communities that you are conducting prescribed burnings, so the community can understand that, okay, there is this smoke, but this is better than a smoke from a wildfire in the late dry season. So I think that these are two important elements: manage the smoke and information, clear information and to the community.
Senhor Ministro.
Let me underline 2 or 3 points that I suppose that it's important to end my intervention in this conference, that I underline again was a very important moment for Portugal and for our responsibilities, our common responsibilities. Let me say that we need first to promote a global knowledge and a global consensus about the knowledge that we have about this issue. And we need to share this knowledge. And I propose, in my dialogue with the National Civil Protection and with the dialogue with AGIF, it's very important to integrate our national centers in a global network to promote a common understanding about the big challenges that we have in this moment about these matters. And to promote, I can say, to promote the cooperation between our centers of knowledge, not just in national terms, but in global terms. And if from this conference we can create a network, a permanent network, integrating our contributions, not just from the academy, but from the experience that comes from the terrain to the concepts. It's very important that we can enhance the system in this way of understanding the system. And then it's important that we promote this common understanding to promote the cultural and mentalities perspectives, to promote the more difficult that we have in the system, promote the changing of the mentalities from the local communities to the national consensus. And it's why the reason where I said that it's very important to promote a consensus between the parties, between the social institutions, private and social institutions. And I would like to underline again, as was said by the president of the AGIF, it's not just a question of means, because we have more means. It's a question of means, but this is a question of the managing to promote a good efficiency of the means, in the using of the means. But we have here in this aspect a good evolution since 2017. In 2017 we had almost 8% in the suppression and 20% in the prevention. Now we have almost 50-50 in the suppression and in the prevention. But we only need to integrate in the system the inputs from the academy, from the knowledge, and promote a common understanding, because, I was said, we have similar problems, and then we have specific problems that are problems of each community, each territory. But if we have a common understanding about the prevention, structural prevention, about the suppression, and then we can promote the adaptation of the models and maintain this dialogue between the terrain and the concepts, and concepts and with the terrain. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and congratulations to the AGIF and our national entities that are integrated in our national system of civil protection. Thank you very much.
I'm about to close the session. I hope you forgive me. I would like to close it with a bit of a trick question for you, which is, how do we ensure that the strategies adopted extend beyond governmental terms?
Can you repeat, please?
How do we ensure that the strategies and the national plans, that they extend beyond government terms? So when the next government comes, when...
Is the reason why I said it is very important to promote a common understanding and a national pact of the civil and political forces. It's very important to give sustainability to the options and to promote the I can say to promote the integration in the people of the need to mobilize all the society to a generation challenge, because this is a challenge of the new generations.
Yes.
And if we want to, because in the last 50 years we have, as I said, a great challenge in the system, because the economy, the society, the demographic challenges, they transform our reality and our attitudes, because we have today a new perspective about the world. We are a globalized societies. And we forget the real value of the things, of the nature, their cycles, and the need to understand, the need to dialogue with the local communities, and to integrate in our perspective of the political options. Integrate the knowledge that the local communities have. Is the reason why I said that it's important we have a multi-level system that dialogues and integrates all the contributions, not just the conceptions, but the realities. And to have sustainability in these options, we need a global pact in the national responsibles, not just that comes from the politics, from the parties, but all actors in the society. The schools, first with the children, the schools, then with our social ecosystems, and then in the parties, in their commitments with the future.
in Parliament itself.
In the Parliament, because is the question.
Yeah.
Is the question to maintain the options and not interrupt permanently the options, because it's impossible to give response to challenges that we are facing in our times.
Thank you very much. So, and on this note, I close the session. Thank you all for your attention and for your questions, and I'll be seeing you around.